Hello everyone, my name is Duncan Harwood and I'm delighted to have been asked to speak at this Risk Awareness Week 2019. Alexi has pulled together a fantastic lineup of speakers to talk to you, and many of them are world leaders in their fields. It's a really exciting group of people that have been brought together, and I'm looking forward to listening to what they have to say myself. We're all here to share ways to improve how risk management is carried out in organisations, and I've called my talk Better Risk Management: How to Introduce Quantitative Risk Management Tools. So here's what I'd like to speak about today. Once I've talked about the aim of the session, I'll share a bit about my professional background and my own journey into risk management and what has led me to where I'm talking to you today. I'll consider how and why organisations are going wrong, then move on to what needs to change and why. I'll look at how people at all levels can start bringing about the change that's needed, and some thoughts on where risk management might go in the future. If you have any questions or comments about anything I mentioned today, please do let me know in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I've called this session Better Risk Management: How to Introduce Quantitative Risk Management Tools, but it's really about much more than that. Risk management is such a huge subject and many areas are intertwined with other areas. So as well as the title, I'll be touching on some aspects of culture, psychology, leadership, audit and assurance, and probably a few other things along the way. What I hope to try and get across in this session is that many organisations are wasting huge amounts of time, effort and money doing things that are of little to no benefit, and that there are better ways of doing things, using tools and techniques which are commonplace in other industries and have been used successfully for a long time. Speaking of other industries, I'll be using some examples from my own experience. And while I'll take you through my own background in a moment, one area that I haven't worked in is financial services. So if there's anyone with a financial services background watching this and thinking that some of what I'm saying doesn't apply to them because they're working to a different set of reporting standards and legislation, then that's the reason why. What I'll be saying applies to the public, private and third sector, indeed just about any type of organisation you can think of. I'm pitching this talk today at people who aren't necessarily involved in risk management in their day-to-day jobs, who may not have any formal involvement with risk management, or who don't have any detailed knowledge of the technical or mathematical aspects of quantitative risk analysis. There are lots of resources out there which can provide you with that knowledge and understanding. And in fact, several of the other speakers this week have literally written the book on these areas. Where it's relevant, I'll try and point out some resources which I found useful in my own journey and which you might want to consider looking at. So a little bit about me. I've worked in several different sectors which might be described as dealing with high risk activities, where decisions are regularly made which could have significant consequences. My first career was as an officer in the British Army, which is some of the most intense leadership and decision-making training in the world. And rightly so, as some of the decisions that need to be made there could have life or death consequences. To help make quality decisions rapidly and during times of pressure, the Army uses a process called the 7 questions, which help a leader come up with a plan quickly and effectively. It's a bit beyond the scope of this session today, but you might be interested to Google that and find out whether you could use it in your own work. After leaving the Army, I worked as a commercial diver before moving into the project management side of the industry. I worked on a project management team where I undertook several roles, including subsea engineer, interface engineer, and risk engineer. Given the potential consequences of something going wrong in that industry, it's no surprise that risk management is taken very seriously and huge levels of resources are devoted to technical and process safety. Things like HAZOPs and hazards are commonplace, along with quantitative cost and schedule risk analysis at various stages of projects. Risk management could be called mature within that industry, although that's not to be complacent about it. Projects still have risk registers and commonly do score risks using 5x5 matrices. A bit more about that later. But generally, that would be for internal communication and information sharing within the company, rather than decisions being made on the project itself. Many of the personnel working on projects, such as engineers, geologists, and economists, use numerical data in their day-to-day jobs, and quantitative risk analysis techniques are well understood and regularly carried out within the industry. I found that my 2 engineering degrees helped me communicate with engineering managers when they were asked to provide data and discuss risk. I then moved to a resilience role in the public sector, where I was involved in the planning and preparation of multi-agency responses to incidents. This wasn't formally considered a risk management role, though of course when you look at it as what do you do when a risk occurs, then it obviously is. This was my first job in the public sector, and I found myself in an area where organisations don't have to worry about making profits, though obviously they do have budgets and there are stringent requirements around how they can spend public money. There's very limited numerical data to work with, as a lot of the work was qualitative and based around what-if scenarios and planning. I then moved into local government and became the Chief Risk Officer for Scotland's second largest local authority. Just as before, no one was using quantitative risk methods other than some external consultants who were involved in large infrastructure projects. At times it was difficult challenging the status quo, but where I was able to do so, using some of the techniques in this presentation, the results were immediate and very positive. Having worked in a number of high-risk public and private sector organisations, and having observed how to use risk management successfully and in a way that adds value, I decided to set up my own consultancy and bring my skills and abilities to a range of clients. So I set up 2020 Risk Management Limited. In this presentation, I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing to help improve performance and decision-making in organisations. It's perhaps also worth mentioning that as well as my engineering degrees and MBA, my formal qualification in risk management was the Management of Risk Practitioner course, which was 5 days long and didn't include any mention of quantitative risk analysis. So everything I've learned has been self-taught using various websites and books and adapting what I've learned to suit the organisations I've worked in and worked for. I've tried to include a few of the most useful resources throughout this presentation in case anyone watching wants to know where to get more information. And if you do have any questions about that, please put them in the comments below. So let's start with where I and many other people think organisations are going wrong. There are a number of things which are done in the name of risk management, but which don't actually do anything to improve an organisation's performance, which is the overall objective of risk management. Whole books have been written about this, along with papers in academic journals, which prove that people are doing things which are no better than guesswork. If you're just starting out in this area, then Hubbard's book is a great place to begin. Risk management is often carried out in a standalone team, often combined with other functions, such as risk and audit, risk and insurance, risk and information security, or even risk and data governance. What this means in practical terms is that risk doesn't have a sufficiently high enough profile or access to senior management to be effective across an organisation. Risk isn't considered by all parts of the organisation when they make decisions, design new processes, or set budgets. Risk as a function needs to be a part of everything the company does, integrated into all decision-making and considered in the context of an organisation's performance and objectives at all times. When these standalone teams produce information, it's often in the form of risk registers and heat maps, which don't relate to the organisation's objectives, KPIs, or other metrics. There's absolutely no point saying something like, there's a risk that our IT systems go down and it's a medium risk, if you can't say what effect that would have on your output, for instance. How would you know whether your IT requires more investment? Are you investing enough? Are you investing too much? That's a decision somebody needs to make, and that'll be based on numbers and data, not the colour of a risk. If risk management is to be valuable to an organisation, it needs to use the language of each team and department. For finance, this might be talking in terms of NPV, IRR, ROI, and so on. For operations, it might be in terms of units produced. For sales, it might be in terms of targets. For health and safety, it might be the number of minor injuries or a similar metric. Telling the head of finance there's a red risk that the organisation won't get enough funding from the government next year doesn't give him anything actionable and is likely to annoy him because wasting his time on things he's already aware of, possibly because he gave you that information in the first place himself. I know of one organisation that carries out a triennial strategic risk review. And just to be clear, triennial means once every 3 years. Is there really any point reviewing strategic risks to an organisation once every 3 years? Is that really a good use of senior management's time? Is it going to be useful or actionable for anyone? The problems and inherent dangers of using heat maps and scoring matrices have been extensively written about, and I don't propose going into any detail here today. Suffice to say that they really should not be used when better tools have been used extensively in other industries for decades. And if you're not familiar with Monte Carlo simulation, this is probably what you should be looking at next. If you're using scoring matrices to try and analyze risk and producing reports which don't relate to objectives or metrics, then you're almost certainly not producing anything of value for anyone. Decision makers can't act on the information that's provided, and it ends up being a waste of time, money, and effort. What's sometimes surprising is that organizations who engage external consultancies to review or provide risk management services don't know that the services they're being provided often use the same ineffective tools they should be replacing. Some consultants describe their work as best practice, but they're unable to prove how that's actually true. For something to be genuinely best practice, it needs to be shown that it offers better outcomes than all the other methods, and this simply hasn't been done. You should be highly suspicious of anyone who claims their processes are best practice but can't provide any data to back that statement up. I also want to mention briefly the role of auditors here, particularly where an organization is trying to use a 3 lines of defense assurance model. Auditors should be assessing the effectiveness of the risk management frameworks. Where these are inherently ineffective, for instance by using a 5x5 scoring matrix across the organization, then the auditors should be calling this out as a weakness. I personally haven't come across this anywhere. Perhaps they do in some sectors and industries, but if not, then one has to question the level of knowledge of the auditors involved. If their training teaches them that risks can only be assessed using heat maps, then they need to be re-educated as well. I've also seen an example relating to an aspect of an information security risk where an audit recommendation was to create a holistic risk register. I don't believe this is a useful action, and as it turned out, I left that organization before that task was completed. So this brings us to the question of why, and this is the crux of the sessions this week. How do we explain the fact that people and organizations are continuing to use tools and techniques which have been proven to be ineffective? I think it comes down to how people are taught risk management and what appears on the training syllabus of various certification agencies. If people can become a management of risk practitioner in 5 days, as I did, then that's nowhere near enough time to teach them how to carry out quantitative risk analysis. And people will continue to be taught the simple but useless way to score risks by multiplying a single value probability by a single value impact and getting a number, which is then turned into a colour. I'm sure that some of the other sessions this week will help you realise, if you don't already, that this is mathematically and logically nonsense. So the flip side to the previous slide is this. What do organisations need to do to change? And I've touched on some of the answers already. Just like any other change in an organisation, people need to realise that there's a problem and then work out what to do to solve it. But as we've also seen, there may be a lot of inertia and resistance to replace what is, on the face of it, a relatively straightforward process, such as scoring risks using a 5x5 matrix, and replacing that with something unfamiliar, such as new software, which require additional data and time to learn how to use. But these issues need to be overcome, and the value in doing so will far outweigh the effort required to get there. Where organizations are using ineffective tools and techniques, these need to be replaced by things that actually provide measurable benefits. Where senior managers need persuading, it's for the knowledgeable and proactive risk manager to best determine how they can demonstrate their value. So the risk manager needs to be a salesman, a negotiator, a champion for change, and probably a project manager as well, if they're going to succeed in shifting the efforts of the risk team. In an ideal world, the organization will have a culture where change is embraced, and the risk manager will have little difficulty shifting the effort away from risk registers, heat maps, and scoring matrices to using effective tools such as decision trees, bow-tie analysis, and quantitative risk analysis. Then the organization will really begin to see how effective risk management can really add value. Here at 2020 Risk Management, we developed the PEDAL model to try and make sure that organizations approach risks in a comprehensive way and deal with them appropriately in a way that is meaningful and adds value. The model is extremely simple, but the feedback we've had is that it really helps managers with their planning and day-to-day operations. There's a deal of overlap between some parts of the model, and that's okay. If your organization thinks that risk management means having lots of detailed risk registers, this model is a way to move beyond that and start using risk management to actually mean something to decision makers. The P is for processes. This means considering everything an organization does and considering where there are risks that could affect how that process is carried out. That would normally be done through a business process review or something similar. There's obviously an overlap with compliance and governance issues here. We don't specify how detailed the process needs to be, as long as it's appropriate to the risks which exist. So the processes could be purchasing, they could be recruitment, they could be disposal of information assets, or whatever it is that your organization does. When you know who does what, when, where, how, and why, then it's easy to start working out what could happen that could affect the success of that process. The E is for events. This looks at things which are both inside and outside your control, which could affect what you do. Things like industrial action, a new competitor entering market, a new technology, a change in legislation, and so on. These are often things that you'd often expect to see listed in a high level or strategic risk register. In safety critical industries, such as oil and gas, then hazard and operability studies, or HAZOPs, and hazard identification studies, or HAZIDs, are used to identify and evaluate events which could cause a risk to people or equipment. And these events should be recorded using Bowtie analysis software. D is for decisions. This means looking at decisions which need to be made and ensuring that appropriate risk analysis has been carried out to make sure the decision is the best one based on the best information available at the time. This is an area that, ironically, often has the least involvement from the risk manager. Decision analysis is a whole field in itself and is probably the one where a risk manager could add the most value, even using basic tools, such as decision trees. The A is for assumptions and uncertainty. This means making sure that uncertainty is built into all your models, plans, strategies, and projects. Many organizations create scenarios such as a low case, a middle case, and a high case, for instance, perhaps running 3 Excel spreadsheets with oil prices of $40, $60, and $80 a barrel. Using Monte Carlo simulation, you can calculate the effect of many uncertainties all at the same time. I'm not going to go into Monte Carlo simulation here. There are plenty of books describing the technique, and I found the book by David Vose to be an excellent reference on the subject. His company also makes their model risk software available for free, and you can find this at vosesoftware.com. L is for links, and this means all aspects of interconnectedness, such as correlation between risks, events, knock-on effects, supply chain risks, and so on. For instance, if a key supplier goes out of business, it could probably have a significant impact on what you do or the way that you do it. As I mentioned before, there may be a great deal of overlap between some of these items, and it may be more appropriate to consider them as prompts rather than formal line items. If an organization is looking to get more out of its risk management function, then this would be a great place to start. Once senior leaders have been brought on side and use the model themselves, they can ensure it's used within their own areas and start becoming part of the overall corporate culture. In the same way that organizations continually look to improve their own decision-making processes to gain competitive advantage, they can get risk management working in the same way by thinking how to pedal faster. That means that the model becomes second nature. All levels of management apply it within their own areas, the information is shared with the relevant people, and a continuous feedback loop looks for improvements to be incorporated wherever they apply. Okay, so we know what we want to achieve to improve risk management within an organization, and this can be done by deciding to implement the pedal model from the previous slide. How do we actually go about making the change within that organization? If you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the comments below. In theory, it's simple, and the fact that people are watching these sessions this week show that there is a desire to do things better. Essentially, it boils down to a few simple steps, and these are shown on the slide. It's necessary to build knowledge within the risk team. Unfortunately, there are a lot of risk managers out there who have maybe heard of Monte Carlo simulation, but have absolutely no idea how to carry it out. they're quite likely to be using things like heat maps and scoring systems, which I've mentioned earlier. These people need to have the skills and abilities to use the proper tools and techniques. If they can't or don't want to change, then they're actually not adding anything to the organization. And in fact, they're actually taking away value. And you need to get them away from the risk management function in some way. Where people are keen to learn, then investment in training will be needed, along with investment in appropriate software packages. One of the most user-friendly pieces of software to carry out Monte Carlo simulation is actually free and will be sufficient for the needs of many users. It's called Model Risk. It's produced by Vose Software, and we use it here at 2020 Risk Management. It's one thing building an internal capability, but it then needs to prove its value. You won't be able to change the entire organization's approach to risk management overnight, so start small and build momentum. Carry out some risk analysis and use the report to demonstrate why it's more useful than whatever you were using before. At the council, I did a quick quantitative risk analysis on the potential costs of claims following a particular public inquiry, and was able to show that the results were likely to be several times the value of what had been estimated previously, which didn't have any analysis carried out. And this meant that the head of finance was able to use a more realistic planning figure and would be less likely to be surprised by an unexpectedly large value claim when they came in. Once you've used some small examples to prove the validity and usefulness of the tools, hopefully you won't have to do much convincing to change the way that everyone else does things. But there may still be some people who don't want to change, perhaps because they've always done risk management this way. I once knew an auditor who said that Monte Carlo analysis is really only useful in banks where they've got large amounts of data. Now, this is clearly nonsense, and it's not for auditors to determine how to do risk management, so I continued using Monte Carlo techniques as I had been before. What it showed me was that people who really should know better will often be unwilling or unable to change, and these people are a blocker to success. Now, if that's the case, then you need to make sure that you're pitching to a more appropriate level of seniority. I've made reference to several of the books and websites which I've personally found helpful in my own development, and there are no doubt many more available. We're now into the realms of change management and the ability to alter the way that people do things. Depending on your abilities, your level of seniority in the organization, your reporting lines, your budget, the corporate culture and the approval process, and a whole host of other factors, it can be easy or difficult to introduce a new way of working. But the principles are still the same. And once you've demonstrated the value of the change, then it needs to be pushed through, and the sooner the better. There is absolutely no point continuing to maintain risk registers in Excel, for example, or paying for specialist software which produces heat maps when there is no tangible value to those outputs, then you should move to using appropriate software instead. I also wanted to mention today briefly what the future of risk management might bring and what part we need to play to get there. Depending on how mature your organization is from a risk management perspective, some of this might be easy, while some might seem like it's a long way off. The organizations who are the most forward-thinking will be the ones who benefit the most from these developments. I've already discussed using proper quantitative analysis methods and software, and this will become more embedded as people become more educated. As far as I'm aware, there is only one fully quantitative-based Bowtie software available on the market, and I can see this becoming more widely used across all industries in time. As leaders begin to see the benefits of improved risk management functions, they'll want more information, analysis, to help them make better quality decisions. The risk manager has a key role to play in all this, both internally within their team, as well as amongst the wider organization. They will need to be senior leaders, or at least have the credibility and knowledge to be able to interact with them. AI is developing at an ever-increasing rate and will become more widespread in automated decision-making processes. While there are various ethical and legal challenges to the use of AI, its use is only going to increase. How humans and computers interact in the decision-making process will be fascinating to see play out. Training for the risk profession will need to be significantly enhanced to provide the right level of knowledge to be effective within organizations. It will need to include elements of psychology, financial literacy, statistical knowledge, and risk managers will become more centralized and higher profile than they currently are. Certification could become irrelevant unless it includes the skills needed to be effective in a risk management role. There's little point becoming a qualified risk manager or something similar in 5 days if you then don't know how to use appropriate software. How do you show your value to the organization in that case? So just before I sum things up, I'd briefly like to mention how I personally put all this into practice in my line of work. I run 2020 Risk Management Limited. We're a consultancy firm based in the UK, but able to work worldwide, providing a full suite of risk management services to the public, private, and third sectors in line with ISO 31000. We help organizations use risk management as an effective tool to help make better decisions and improve their performance. We review and provide assurance around existing risk management arrangements and help identify and eliminate activities which are wasting time, money, and effort. There's more information on our website, including a list of the services and training we can provide, along with our contact details. Do please get in touch if there's something you think we might be able to help with. So if you made it this far, thank you very much for listening. In this short session, which is pitched at people who aren't necessarily risk management subject matter experts, I've taken you through some of the ways that organizations can improve how they do risk management and where they should focus their efforts if they want to use risk management to help improve performance. I looked at some examples where organizations are commonly wasting time, money, and effort and what they need to do to change. I've described the model which can be used to get organizations thinking about risk as more than just risk registers and heat maps, and how they can incorporate risk management within their existing processes to great effect. I mentioned how to manage the change that's needed. And finally, I looked at a few developments in risk management which could happen over the coming years. I said at the start that risk management is a huge subject area, and I've tried to keep this presentation somewhat high level and general rather than go into any great depth. There's a lot of information out there, and I've tried to provide a few pointers throughout to resources which I've found very useful. I hope you found something useful or interesting along the way. And if you've got any questions, comments, feedback, or points to discuss, then send them to us, type them in the box below, and we'll get back to you with those. Is there anything I've said that perhaps you disagree with or think I'm wrong? I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that as well. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this session, it's to think about what risk management means to you in your current role, to think about what benefit your contribution currently brings to the organization, and what, if anything, might need to be changed. I haven't come across anywhere that is confident that they're doing everything right. And if you need to make improvements, it's important that you have the drive to do something about it. As a professional community, we're all responsible for challenging and changing the status quo because no one else will do it. If you're in a position to make changes, then listen to what you're being told. Listen to what's being brought to you and take action. If you're a leader or a senior manager, then look closely at the information that's being presented to you by your risk teams and ask yourself, how useful is it actually to you? Challenge your risk teams. Ask them about Monte Carlo analysis if they're not doing it already. And if they can't provide reassuring answers, then you need to change something. You might want to get in touch with us here at 2020 Risk Management. Thank you very much for listening today.